6 months of chasing broken, dead-end clues had led me to this moment, standing before St. Andrew's Church on a Tuesday night at the end of October, rain pouring relentlessly, and turning the stone pavement along North End Street into foggy mirrors that blurred the neon glow from the Italian restaurants lining both sides of the road. 3 women had walked through this very door and never walked back out, and I no longer had the patience to act reasonably or safely. I pulled my coat collar higher, drew in a deep breath to quiet the cold shiver running down my spine, then pushed open the heavy wooden door creaking from dampness. The air inside carried the scent of incense mingled with the old, lingering moisture of a building that had stood for more than 100 years. The kind of smell that made you feel as if you were stepping into a place both sacred and secretive. I am Harper Lane, 27 years old, an investigative journalist for the Boston Globe, and I understood clearly that stepping inside meant pushing myself into the darkness so many people had warned me to stay away from. But every day that passed, every missing face staring back at me from old articles, every unfinished phone call with a grieving family, all of it kept pulling me back here, to the very place where they had vanished without a trace. Inside, rows of long wooden pews stretched toward the altar, small candles casting shaky pools of light across the saint statues, their shadows trembling with every gust of wind slipping through the cracks of the door. I let my eyes scan every corner, every side aisle the 3 women might have turned into, my heart pounding not from fear but from the sense that I was standing achingly close to the answer I had been chasing for half a year. The file of the 3rd missing woman was still lying on my desk at the newsroom, the last page stained with a splash of coffee, because I had stayed up until 3 a.m. comparing every way, timeline, every camera frame, every witness statement. Everything pointed to one place: St. Andrew's, Tuesday night, after Mass. A coincidence too perfect to be random. As the door closed behind me, the sounds from outside vanished completely, leaving only the rain hammering the tall stained glass windows and my own footsteps echoing through the vast space. I felt as if someone was watching me, not in an obvious predatory way, but like a cold blade lightly grazing the back of my neck. I walked toward the confessional on the left side of the church, the place where 2 of the victims had last been seen according to an elderly parishioner. The wooden door was shut, no light, no sound, but something behind it made my heart leap. I knew I could turn around, leave, write a safe article, keep my career, keep my life. But I also knew 3 families were waiting for answers, and that if I backed down now, there might be a 4th woman who would disappear. The rain kept falling steadily, outside, the lights inside dimming bit by bit, and I placed my hand on the confessional door handle, held my breath, my heart tightening inside my chest. Whatever waited inside, I was ready to face it, because tonight, in this place, the truth would have nowhere left to hide. If you're listening to this and feel that the story touches something in you, take a second to subscribe to our channel, like and share this video so we have the strength to keep bringing you emotional stories every day. And if you don't mind, tell me, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know which corner of the world this story has reached. We cherish every line you share with us. My hand tightened slightly around the confessional handle, the cold metal seeping into my skin and making me shiver. But the hesitation lasted only a single breath before I pushed the heavy wooden door open and stepped into the narrow space, swallowed by thick darkness. The enclosed room muted the sound of rain completely, leaving only the fast, thudding rhythm of my heartbeat, the soft sound of my own breathing, and the musty dampness of the old wooden walls pressing close around me. I pulled the door almost shut behind me, my eyes struggling to adjust. The uneasiness I had felt outside the church crystallized into something sharp and undeniable. On the opposite partition, where the priest usually sat, a small curtain covered the exchange window, tied tightly shut with not a sliver of light passing through. I reached toward it when I heard a faint sound, something like a breath shifting or a piece of wood brushing against another, subtle but enough to lock every muscle in my body. I inhaled slowly, telling myself it might just be a priest preparing for a late confession, or a parishioner who stepped in before me. But my instincts whispered something different, something colder. Someone was sitting in that darkness, completely still, as if waiting for me to speak first. I placed my darkness, hands on my lap, tried to steady my voice, though my throat felt dry. I need to ask about the 3 women who disappeared after coming here. My words came out so softly I thought they would dissolve into the dark, but right then, A slight sound came from behind the curtain, like someone shifting their weight against the wooden wall. No response. I swallowed my rising fear and continued. I don't mean to disturb the church, but I believe the key to all 3 disappearances is here. A long silence fell, heavy and cold enough to make me second-guess everything. I noticed my hands trembling, but before I could pull back, a voice emerged from behind the curtain, low, calm, smooth spoken with a smile that held no warmth. You shouldn't be asking those questions here, Harper Lane. Hearing my name from a stranger's mouth froze me. My breath hitched, stretching 1 second into an eternity. I didn't remember ever introducing myself, nor leaving any trail easy enough to follow this way. Who are you? I whispered, my voice thin and tight. No answer. Only the steady breathing of a man who seemed to be studying every flicker of my reaction. I forced down the panic rising in my chest, slipped my hand subtly into my coat pocket, touching the small recorder I had switched on before entering the church. If you know who I am, I said softly, you also know I won't stop. This time the man gave a short, quiet laugh, so small it sounded like a breath escaping through his nose. Yet it sent chills crawling across my skin. I know, he said, his voice smooth, dark, and edged with something as dangerous as a blade hidden in a sleeve. And that's exactly why you need to leave now. I turned my head slightly, glancing at the door behind me, feeling cornered inside an invisible trap. Why should I leave? Because, he said slowly, each word sliding across the wood between us. Someone else is looking for you tonight. Before I could ask anything else, the echo of the church's main door slammed open in the distance, followed by hurried footsteps, not the kind of steps belonging to someone coming to pray, but of people arriving with intentions anything but ordinary. The man behind the curtain whispered, almost commanding, "Get down, stay silent." And for the first time in 6 months of investigating this case, I realized I was no longer the hunter. I had become the prey. Instinct urged me to lower myself the moment the footsteps grew louder, echoing through the vast church and tightening every breath inside my chest. The air thickened around me, the smell of old wood and dampness suddenly sharper, as if the confessional itself were shrinking inward, closing in around my ribs. I tried to stay silent, just as the man had warned, but the tension made my heartbeat pound so violently, I feared it might thrum straight through the wooden wall and give me away. Outside, at least 3 people were approaching, their shoes striking the cold stone floor in steady, deliberate steps that held none of the softness of prayer. Someone barked orders in a language that wasn't English, the tone sharp and commanding. I didn't understand the words, but the intent was unmistakable. They hadn't come to worship. The man behind the curtain shifted, so quietly it was almost soundless, yet I could feel the change in him as clearly as if the air itself had altered. Gone was the calm, still presence from moments earlier. In its place was a tension honed to a razor's edge, like a blade poised just above the skin. When the heavy church door slammed shut, and the echo jolted through the space, his voice cut through the darkness, low and precise, impossible not to obey. "Harper, close your eyes." I didn't understand why, but before I could question it, I heard a soft metallic click from his side, the unmistakable sound of metal shifting into place. A gun. A cold shiver crawled down my spine, but there was no time to react before the curtain between our compartments slid open with perfect, terrifying silence. That was when I saw him for the first time, in the dim light of the tiny wall lamp, and for a fleeting moment, I forgot how to breathe. The man was no priest. He sat with the quiet dominance of someone accustomed to inhabiting darkness, his frame solid beneath a dark coat, his face carved sharply, his jawline catching the faint gold glow. His hair was cut short, slightly tousled in a way that felt unstudied yet dangerous. His eyes were black and steady, so calm they were frightening, as if he had been watching me long before I stepped into the church, maybe even long before tonight. I didn't need to ask. Instinct told me he was not someone I should ever be near. Yet for reasons I couldn't name, I couldn't look away. "Don't make a sound," he whispered, leaning close enough that his breath brushed the wooden partition. "They're inside." I opened my mouth to ask who they were, but the footsteps stopped right in front of the confessional. A loud knock hit the wooden wall, jolting through my body so sharply I nearly stood up. Someone outside said something harsh in that same foreign language, then rattled the door handle. I held my breath. The man's eyes met mine through the narrow opening in the curtain, giving a silent order I dared not break. He placed his hand on the inside handle to hold it shut, then leaned toward me, his voice barely a breath, sharp as a cold blade against the throat. "Look at me, Harper, only at me." I did, drawn by an instinct older than fear, trying not to unravel as metal scraped against metal outside, their frustration scraping along the wood. A moment later, the footsteps retreated, fading down the nave for now. My exhale was so faint it barely existed. The man released the handle but didn't look away from me. "They're not here for me," he said. "They're here for you." My heart tightened, so sharply it hurt. "For me? I hope you understand," he replied, his eyes hard but carrying a flicker almost like a warning meant to protect. "Those 3 disappearances aren't random. And tonight, they realize someone has been digging deeper than they allow." He studied me, as if weighing whether I could withstand what he was about to say. "My name is Dominic Reyes," he said, his voice so low it barely crossed the space between us. My breath stopped. Dominic Reyes. The name people in North End spoke only in half-whispers. The name that surfaced in organized crime dossiers I'd read in secret, never imagining he would be sitting inches from me. I was Harper Lane, investigative journalist, and I had walked into a confessional with the one man the underground world of Boston preferred never to provoke. Dominic held my gaze, his eyes dark and unnervingly calm, like water just before a storm breaks. "From this moment on," he said, "nothing will be the same." I realized then he wasn't threatening me. He was stating a fact. And in that instant, within that dark confessional, my life veered onto a road I could never turn back from. Before I could speak, the sharp clang of metal hitting stone echoed from the end of the hallway, cold and decisive, the sound that signals a hunt beginning. Dominic shifted instantly, his eyes turning darker, harder, as if the last shred of normal caution no longer mattered. He placed a hand on my shoulder, firm but not painful, grounding me just as fear surged through me like a rising tide. "They're here," he whispered, then yanked the curtain aside and opened the confessional door. I didn't even have time to move before gunfire exploded near the altar, the sound splitting the air so violently my body folded in on itself. Dominic reacted faster than the echo itself, gripping my wrist and pulling me flush against him, his voice dropping into something forged from steel. "Stay with me. Don't let go." We burst out of the confessional. 2 figures appeared at the end of the aisle, the overhead lights gleaming off the black barrels of the guns in their hands. A bullet skimmed the statue ahead of us, shards of stone spraying across the floor, the sharp tinkling sound like a too-late warning that everything had already spiraled far beyond my imagination. Dominic shoved me behind a stone column, positioning his body like a living shield between me and the gunfire. Close enough to feel his breath warm the top of my head, he leaned down and spoke barely above a movement of his lips. "When I say run, you run. Don't look back." Another shot cracked so violently a long fracture split down the statue of Mary behind us. Dominic leaned out just enough to fire twice, so quickly my mind couldn't catch up with the motion. One of the attackers screamed and fell, the other dove behind the pews, his footsteps pounding the floor in a rhythm that matched the chaos in my chest. Dominic didn't wait. He grasped my hand tightly and pulled me down the side aisle toward the back of the church. Candle flames trembled wildly. Religious paintings blurred past as we moved. My breath came in gasps, my heart hammering like it wanted to rip free. "Where are we going?" I choked out. "The basement," Dominic answered. "The old passage behind the storage room." "This church has a basement?" 18th century, smuggling routes and wartime weapons drops. You didn't read all the records. He stopped at a small wooden door nearly hidden behind a candle cabinet. Dominic twisted the handle. It popped open to reveal a narrow stone staircase plunging into darkness. Cold air rushed up, smelling of earth, dampness, and time. Dominic placed a hand on my back, his voice calm again, impossibly calm amid the chaos. "Down." I took each step slowly, gripping the stone wall to steady myself. Above us, hurried footsteps thundered, followed by someone shouting in that foreign language again. Dominic slammed the hatch shut just as a bullet thudded into the wood, splintering it. I flinched as he locked the iron bar, then descended quickly, his face carved with resolve. "Can they break through?" I whispered, barely recognizing my own trembling voice. "They can. he said without hesitation. But not before we're gone. We reached the bottom and stepped into the ancient tunnel, barely wide enough for 2 people side by side. The beam from Dominic's small flashlight sliced through the dust, revealing low stone arches and the marks of hands that had built this place more than a century ago. Somewhere water dripped, metal wires clinked faintly overhead as Dominic quickened his pace. Fear clawed at my ribs. "Dominic," I whispered, "who are they?" He looked at me briefly, the black in his eyes slicing through the dark. "The ones who took the 3 women," he said. "And tonight, they plan to add you." His words froze me for a heartbeat. But Dominic tugged my hand sharply, reminding me stopping wasn't an option. Ahead, at the end of the tunnel, stood an old metal door, dull, cold, and somehow the only hope left. Dominic turned to me, placing a hand against my cheek, his gaze firm but not unkind. "Once we cross this door," he said, "your life changes. Completely." My breath caught. "Why?" Dominic's fingers tightened slightly in the dark. "Because when you walk through it, Harper, you're no longer an outsider." Behind us, distant wood cracked the sound of a barrier giving way, the night catching up to us. Dominic pushed the door open, and I stepped into a world I never knew had been hiding beneath the heart of Boston. The metal door led to a narrow passage that opened directly into the parking lot behind the church, where Dominic had already prepared a dark SUV without license plates. He opened the passenger door and practically pushed me inside before circling to the driver's seat. The moment he sat down, he started the engine, the tires screeching against the wet concrete as he sped out of the shadowed alley behind Street Andrews. I turned to look through the rear window just in time to see our pursuers spill out from the back of the church a few seconds later. But the car surged forward so fast they dissolved into the thick, rain-soaked darkness. Dominic didn't speak. Both hands gripped the wheel, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked ahead as if he could see straight through the downpour. I could sense the absolute control in every movement he made, the decisive calm of a man who had learned to escape death with bloody hands at his heels. My breath slowly steadied, though my heart still hammered from the fear that hadn't yet faded. I glanced toward him, my voice low and trembling. "Will they catch up?" Dominic didn't turn his head, but his eyes flicked briefly to the rearview mirror. "No, but they'll come back, which means we can't go anywhere. You've been staying, and we can't risk letting you be seen." I tightened my fingers around the fabric of my coat, caught between the feeling of being rescued and the terrible sense of being pulled into a storm with no way out. "Then where are we going?" Dominic answered after a slow, heavy breath, as if he knew his reply would change everything. "Boston Harbor, my penthouse." I didn't have time to argue. Dominic steered into the tunnel leading to the highway, accelerating toward the most expensive district in the city. When we reached the underground garage of the building, he shut off the engine and turned toward me, his expression no longer cold but sharpened by a different kind of vigilance. "Upstairs you'll be safe. But Harper, once you step inside, you won't return to your old life for a while." I opened my mouth to insist I wasn't afraid, that I could take care of myself, but after what had just happened, those words felt thin and meaningless. Dominic stepped out and came around to open my door, placing a hand lightly on my back as he guided me to the private elevator. When the doors slid open, I stepped inside and immediately realized this wasn't a place meant for ordinary people. Black stone floors reflected our silhouettes, and the transparent glass walls offered a clear view of the harbor, shimmering faintly in the rain. The distant sound of crashing waves felt like it belonged to another world entirely, far removed from the one we had just escaped. When the elevator stopped, the doors opened into a shockingly vast space. I stood frozen for a few seconds. The penthouse sat on the top floor, with towering ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows facing Boston Harbor directly. In the distance, fishing boats swayed on the silvery water under the night wind, and behind them, the city glowed in the rain. The interior was dark, sharp, and deliberate, a luxurious refuge that felt as dangerous as it was beautiful, just like its owner. Dominic walked ahead, checking every corner automatically, the kind of habit forged from years of survival. Even the smallest of his movements carried trained vigilance. He placed his gun on the marble counter, removed his coat, and turned back to me. "You're soaked, and you're cold. The bathroom's that way. I left fresh towels. Change, you need it." I followed his direction into the bathroom, and for the first time in hours, I had space to breathe. The hot water washed away the dirt from the tunnel, though it couldn't scrub the weight of everything pressing on my shoulders. When I stepped out wearing the soft clothes he'd left, Dominic stood by the window, arms folded, staring out at the stormy harbor with a mind clearly elsewhere. I approached slowly. "Dominic, why did you help me? They were after you. You didn't have to save me." Dominic turned, his eyes dark as storm water, his voice low enough it felt like he spoke only to me. "Harper, I didn't save you. By coincidence. I saved you because they chose you. And once they choose someone, they don't stop until that person disappears completely." My stomach tightened painfully. "Then what about you? Who are you in all of this?" Dominic took one step forward, closing the distance between us to only a few breaths. "The one they fear most," he said slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. "And the only one who can keep you alive." I looked at him, unsure what was more frightening, the men hunting me, or the man standing inches away. And in that moment, deep within his eyes, I saw something clearer than any warning he'd given. I hadn't just been brought somewhere safe. I had been pulled into the center of the storm. I sat at the black wooden table in the vast living room of the penthouse, a notebook, 3 old case files, and a cup of hot tea Dominic had placed there before leaving to take an urgent call. The soft yellow light cast onto the pages made it feel as if every clue were laid bare beneath its fragile glow. But the longer I looked, the more I sensed something no one had ever touched. 3 missing women. 3 files that had stolen half a year of sleep from me. 3 question marks with no answers. Yet placed side by side like this, I realized I had never seen them from a wide enough angle. I opened the first file, the first victim. Claire Monroe, 32, a social worker. Last seen entering Street Andrews on a Tuesday night to leave a thank you letter for the priest who had helped her in a family case. She entered at 9:14. At 10:23, the door was still closed on camera, and she never came out. I moved to the second file. Maria Jensen, 29, a graduate student studying culture. She visited the church to find material on ancient architecture. Appeared at 8:43. At 10 o'clock, the camera lost a frame lasting 8 minutes. Afterward, the door opened, but only one figure exited, unidentifiable. Then the third file. Lorraine Weaver, 31, an elementary school teacher. She had gone to the church to pray after receiving devastating news about her mother. Entered near 11, and vanished as if she had never existed. I arranged the files in a row, my pulse steady but heavy. All of them appeared on Tuesday nights. All arrived alone. All passed near the confessional. But that wasn't what chilled me. I leaned closer, fingers brushing the pages as if searching for something invisible. And then I saw it. On each file, in the final notes section, there was a tiny detail I had once overlooked, a symbol. Not a police mark, not a religious sign, but a single letter, circled in red ink. The letter R. A tremor ran through me. On Claire's file, the letter R scrawled behind the small altar. On Maria's, the R carved beneath a wooden table in the old reading room. On Lorraine's, the R marked on the last page of the prayer book she had left. I whispered under my breath, barely a sound. "They're connected." "Yes," I jolted, turning quickly. Dominic stood at the far end of the room, hands in his pockets, his dark eyes as sharp as if he had been listening long enough to hear everything. He walked toward me, each step slow but heavy, drawing the air tighter around us. "You know about this R?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady though tension clung to every word. Dominic pulled out a chair and sat across from me, leaning forward slightly as if preparing to reveal something he had held back for far too long. "I know it isn't a coincidence," he said, his voice deep and slow, choosing each word carefully. "And I know those 3 women weren't the first victims." I blinked. "You mean there are more?" Dominic didn't answer at once. He stared at the symbol on the page, a flicker of unhidden anger crossing his face. "That R isn't tied to the police or the church. It's the mark of a group that's operated in the shadows for years. They use the letter R to tag their targets." The ground seemed to shift beneath me. Dominic gave a small nod, his eyes never looking away from me. "Tonight, they tagged you." My breath caught tight in my throat. Every part of me wanted to deny it, to insist he was wrong, but deep down I knew Dominic never spoke without reason. I placed a hand on the table, trying to steady myself, then asked the question that I knew would change everything. Dominic, what does that R stand for? Dominic looked at me, his eyes darkening in a way that made my skin prickle, as if I had just opened a door that could never be closed again. Requiem, he said in a voice soft as a confession. I exhaled the word, barely audible. Requiem. A prayer for the dead? Dominic clenched his jaw, his eyes slicing through the silence like a blade. Not just that. Requiem is the largest trafficking organization in the Northeast. Those 3 women didn't disappear. They were taken. My hand pressed against my chest as my heart pounded violently. And me? Why did they target me? Dominic lowered his head for a brief second, then lifted it, revealing the truth he could no longer hide. Because you know too much. And because there's something in those files that only you saw. I couldn't speak. Dominic stood, stepped closer, and placed his hand gently on my shoulder, grounding me before fear dragged me under. Harper, you think you're investigating 3 disappearances. He leaned down, his eyes burning into mine. But what you found is the heart of an entire network. In that moment, I understood something I had never dared to believe before. I was no longer just the one searching for the truth. I had become the key to it. And the highest value target of the people hiding in the dark. The air inside the penthouse thickened the moment Dominic spoke the name Requiem, as if the entire room were holding its breath alongside me. I pulled my hand away from the file, stood, and stepped back because my legs suddenly felt too unsteady to hold my weight. Dominic watched me, his eyes dark and sharp, not surprised in the least. It was as if he had known this moment would come. Outside, the wind slammed against the tall glass panes, creating a sound like fingernails dragging across crystal. I wrapped my arms around myself and drew in a long, trembling breath. If Requiem chose me, I said, my voice hoarse with fear, then here. I'm still not safe, am I? Dominic didn't answer immediately. He stepped toward me slowly, deliberately, as if afraid any sudden move might push me over the edge. Harper, I won't let them touch you. Not as long as you're with me. His words were steel, solid and unyielding, but before I could absorb the safety in them, the lights in the penthouse snapped off. Everything plunged into darkness. I gasped, but a warm, strong hand landed on my shoulder instantly, steadying me. Stay quiet, Dominic whispered, his breath brushing my ear, low and deep, the kind of warning that carves straight into your bones. From the far corner of the room came a soft click, and then a faint red glow appeared on the distant wall. A laser, aiming precisely at the spot we'd been standing moments before. Dominic pulled me to the floor in one swift, impossibly fast motion. A silenced shot cracked through the glass, burying itself in the marble wall behind us. I heard the sharp, dangerous sound of cracking glass. They found me? I whispered, my hands trembling uncontrollably. No, Dominic murmured, his voice low but steady. They found you. His hand slid down to grip my wrist, pulling me behind the sofa where the darkness swallowed most of us. He reached behind his back and drew a gun in a single practiced movement. The laser swept the room again before disappearing. The shadow outside the window vanished. But Dominic didn't ease up. He pressed 2 fingers to my lips, signaling silence, then crawled toward the heavy curtain covering part of the window. I held my breath as he reached it, lifted the fabric just a few inches, and peered outside. I saw his body tense in a single, sharp motion, enough to send my heart crashing to the floor. He turned back to me, pulled me upright, and spoke in a whisper filled with urgency. 3 of them. All armed, they're not shooting to kill. Which means they want you alive. A cold wave washed over me as if someone had poured ice along my spine, but Dominic gripped my shoulders, holding me in place, forcing me to meet his eyes. It was the gaze of someone familiar with danger, but tonight, there was something else beneath it. Something personal, heavy. Harper, listen, he said. We have to leave. Now. Where? Somewhere they won't dare step without orders. Dominic yanked a small suitcase from beneath the table, threw in a hard drive, a few files, and a spare gun. He shoved a formality, small device into my pocket before I could even see what it was. Where are we going? I asked, my voice cracking. Dominic snapped the suitcase shut, grabbed my wrist again, and dragged me toward the private elevator. His hand didn't leave mine, as if he feared I might vanish if he loosened his grip. My estate in Cape Cod. The elevator doors opened, and we stepped inside. Dominic hit the button for the lower level. The doors closed, and for the first time since meeting him, I realized Dominic wasn't just fighting the men outside. He was fighting something else, a deeper fear, one he didn't show the world. I swallowed the tremor rising in my chest and whispered, "Dominic, if they really want me, are you sure you can keep me safe?" Dominic turned toward me, meeting my eyes without flinching, without walls, without armor. "I'm certain of one thing," he said, voice sharp as a blade. "They won't take you, not while I'm breathing." When the elevator doors opened, the noise of the underground garage filled the air, mingling with the sound of rain hammering the steel roof. And when Dominic dragged me toward another vehicle, I understood that everything tonight had only been the beginning. From this moment on, anything standing between me and the truth would become a threat. But the greatest threat of all might be the man running beside me, with eyes no one could read, and a promise far more dangerous than the darkness swallowing us. And that was the moment I knew. Everything had escalated, and there was no going back. Dominic's car tore through the storm, like a black arrow slicing the fog-thick highway leading south. I stared out the window as the streetlights streaked into long, broken lines, and my heart pounded in erratic rhythms, trying to anchor itself amid the chaos with no end in sight. Dominic drove in silence, tense as a drawn bowstring. Every lane change, every shift in speed, was executed with such clinical precision it felt inhuman, as if his body had been trained to live on the knife edge between life and death. The road to Cape Cod stretched longer than I remembered, and as the city faded behind us, the night ocean emerged, black, cold, swallowing the horizon under the sliver of a pale crescent moon. Dominic didn't look at me, but his voice cut through the stillness like a blade. "Harper, what you're chasing isn't a story anymore. It's a war." I turned to him. "And you? Where do you stand in that war?" Dominic didn't answer immediately. Headlights illuminated the narrow road leading into pine woods, toward an isolated property where the sea seemed close enough to swallow the land. Finally, he spoke. "I stand where I have to survive." "You mean, on the side of darkness?" Dominic tilted his head, his black eyes flicking toward me for an instant. "I mean on the side that's necessary." We reached the Cape Cod estate near dawn. The 2-story stone house stood silent, between tall pines, its front lantern casting warm light across the rain-soaked ground. When we stepped inside, I felt a difference immediately compared to the Boston penthouse. This place wasn't cold or sharp. It breathed like a home lived in, not just a refuge. Dominic checked every window, every hallway, every shadow, with the caution of someone who never trusted luck. I stood in the spacious living room, where wooden walls and a glowing fireplace softened the storm outside. Dominic returned, hanging his coat on a hook, then looked at me with an expression that felt like a threshold, a moment he could no longer postpone. "Harper," he said, his voice low and weighted. "What kind of man do you think I am?" I clenched my hands. "I think you're dangerous," I said truthfully. Dominic nodded once, without offense, as if I'd merely named a fact. "And I think you've done things I don't want to know. Probably. And you're not a priest." Dominic let out a short laugh, humorless and edged with bitterness. "Definitely not." I stepped closer, feeling the warmth of the fireplace gather behind me. "Then why were you in the confessional tonight?" Dominic braced his hands on the back of a chair, leaning forward, his gaze cutting through every layer of defense I thought I had. "I wasn't there for God," he said quietly. "I was there for them." My breath caught. Dominic continued, his voice sharpening like the sea wind outside. "Requiem is expanding. They target women who are alone, unnoticed, or vulnerable. I've been tracking them for months. And when you showed up with those 3 files, you became a target they couldn't ignore." A chill ran the full length of my spine. "So you helped me. Why? To atone for something?" Dominic straightened and took a step closer, closing the distance between us to only a few breaths. "Not to atone," he said, his eyes deep and dark as a hidden tide. "I helped you because I refused to let those bastards take one more woman. And you think that makes you a good man?" Dominic's laugh this time was deeper, wearier. "Harper, I am not a good man." He held my gaze, unflinching, unguarded. "I've done things you will never print in your paper, but I don't make women disappear. And I don't sell them." A knot tightened in my chest, fear, grief, and something else I didn't want to name. "Do you think you're on the right side?" Dominic looked toward the window, where the black ocean churned like a blade. I'm on the side that can fight them. Then he turned back to me, his eyes an unspoken vow. And I will fight. For you. His words pulled the entire room into a strange, aching quiet. I didn't know whether to fear him or trust him. But deep in my chest, for the first time since those 3 women vanished, I felt someone was truly standing on my side. Even if that someone had been born from the dark, the air inside the Cape Cod estate settled after that conversation, but the stillness brought no peace. It felt like the flat, glassy surface of the sea before a storm rises, so quiet I could hear every beat of my own heart and even the distant sound of wind threading through the pine trees outside. Dominic stood only a few steps away, yet his presence filled the entire room, something powerful and impossible to define, something that made me want to step back, even as I found myself unable to look away. The firelight reflected off his face, sharpening his already striking features, and I realized again that I still didn't truly understand the man standing before me. Dominic Reyes, the man Boston whispered about like a shadowed legend, the man I had approached thinking he was a priest, and the man who had just vowed he would fight for me. I didn't know which part of all that made my heart tremble, but I hated that I felt it. Dominic brought a hand to the bridge of his nose, a simple gesture that carried the weight of months spent running, calculating, confronting, and surviving. When he looked up and caught my gaze, his dark eyes locked onto mine with a force that stole my breath. "You should rest," he said, his voice low and deep, with something softer beneath it, something even he might not want exposed. "Today has been too much for you." I nodded, though my feet didn't move. Something invisible held me in place, a tension between us just close enough that I could hear the subtle cadence of his breathing. Dominic crossed the room and switched on a small lamp by the bookshelf. Warm golden light spread across the space, casting a softness I never expected from a place that belonged to him. "You live here alone?" I asked, my voice rough from lingering tension. Dominic didn't answer right away. He rested his hand on the back of a chair, his gaze drifting toward the window where waves lapped softly against the shore. "Yes," he said at last. "It's easier to stay. Safe that way." "Easier," I murmured. "Or lonelier." Dominic turned, and this time his eyes held no coldness, only truth. And that truth tightened something inside my chest. "Both," he said quietly. In that moment, without knowing why, I stepped closer, as if the space between us had suddenly become too wide. And Dominic, almost instinctively, stepped closer as well, as though he'd never let anyone cross this invisible threshold, but couldn't stop himself now. "Harper," he said softly, the words sounding like a warning. "Or a confession." I swallowed, trying to steady my voice even as something inside me shook loose. "I don't know how to feel about you," I admitted. "Part of me wants to trust you, and part of me knows I shouldn't." Dominic was very close now. I could smell the faint trace of the ocean clinging to his coat, the old wood of the house, and the warm breath he exhaled when he spoke. "You don't have to trust me," he said gently. "You just have to stay alive. I'll handle the rest. But I still don't know what kind of man you are." Dominic paused, and then he did something I didn't expect. He touched my hand. Just a brief, light touch, but enough to send a single, uncontrollable tremor through my body. His hand was warm, so at odds with the cold edge of his exterior. "I'm not a good man," he said, his voice so deep it felt like it cut through the space between us. "But I will never harm you." I looked down at his hand around mine, the sensation so right and so wrong it made my head spin. "Why?" I whispered. Dominic didn't look away. "Because from the moment you walked into that confessional, I knew I wouldn't let you disappear like the others." My heartbeat stumbled not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. Trust. Dominic released my hand a second later, as if sensing that the moment had crossed a line neither of us was prepared to name. He stepped away, toward the window, drawing in a breath as if steadying himself. But when he spoke again, nothing in his voice tried to hide or soften the truth. "Harper, whatever this thing is between us, it shouldn't exist." I looked at his back, the broad line of his shoulders outlined by the firelight. "But it already does," I said softly, but firmly. Dominic didn't turn, but I saw his hands tighten, and I understood right then that from this moment on, neither of us stood on solid ground anymore. We were at the edge of something dangerous. something neither of us could step back from, only fall into each other, even if it meant facing a danger far greater than Requiem or any enemy outside these walls. Morning in Cape Cod arrived with pale light filtering through the thick curtains, but it held none of the calm I expected from a house by the sea. I woke with a faint sting behind my eyes, the remnants of a long night where Dominic's last words echoed again and again in my mind. Whatever this is between us shouldn't exist, but what waited for me in the living room was heavier still. Dominic sat at the wooden table, maps, phones, and thick stacks of documents spread across it like a battlefield he'd been fighting alone before I even woke. When I entered, he looked up, and his eyes had returned to their sharp, controlled coldness, as though the fragile moment from last night had never happened. "Harper," he began, his voice calm in a way that made it even more unnerving. "We need to talk about the next step." I sat across from him, my palms damp despite the cool air. "What step?" Dominic placed a photo in front of me, clipped from a traffic camera. I saw myself in the corner of the frame, wearing my long coat, leaving the cafe 2 days ago. A man stood not far behind, his face obscured beneath a hood. "He's been following you since before you went to Street Andrews," Dominic said. "Requiem isn't just reacting to your investigation. They had already decided to target you." I swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" Dominic studied me so long I felt as if he were weighing each word with the fear that the truth might break me. "We use you as bait," he said. My heart jolted violently, like something had seized it. For a moment, I simply sat there, breathless, blinking, trying to understand whether I'd heard him correctly. "You want to use me?" Dominic planted his elbows on the table, leaning in, his voice dropping to something soft but unshakably steady. "Harper, I don't want that, but it's the only way to draw them out. They never reveal themselves unless they believe they're close to taking the target." I shook my head, the sting of betrayal hitting harder than I expected from the man who'd vowed to protect me. "You said you'd keep me safe, and now you're planning to throw me out in front of them?" Dominic rose and came around the table, but I turned away from his eyes, afraid they would burn through whatever resolve I had left. "Harper," he said, his voice carrying something deeper, heavier. "If there were any other way, I swear to you, I would take it." I lifted my gaze to his, trying to see whether what lived in his eyes was strategy or sincerity. But all I saw was conflict, raw and unhidden. Dominic lowered his voice. "Requiem is moving their victims. Quickly, silently, without leaving a trace. If we don't act now, there will be a fourth woman, a fifth, and possibly you." I shuddered when he spoke that last word. Dominic reached out and gently tilted my chin upward, forcing me to look at him. "I won't send you in alone. Wherever you go, I go. I'll be within reach, every second. They won't touch you." His eyes burned with a promise louder than the waves crashing against the rocky shore outside. But that promise came with a truth far more frightening. I whispered, my voice thin. "Dominic, if we do this, I become a real target." Dominic nodded, without hiding it. "From the moment you walked into Street Andrews, you were already a target. The only difference now is that you won't walk into this alone." He returned to the table, retrieved a small specialized phone, and placed it in my palm. "It's a tracker. It sends a direct signal to me. You do not take it off, no matter what happens." I stared at the device, a weight settling in my chest like stone. "And the plan?" Dominic met my eyes with an intensity that chilled me. Not because it was cold, but because it was too clear, too resolute. "We let them believe you're going back to Boston on your own to continue your investigation," he said. "They'll follow you. And when they show themselves, I'll end them. One by one." His voice cut through the room like a blade splitting the air. My heart hammered, torn between fear and something else, something pulling me toward a path from which there was no return. I knew I should refuse. I knew I should run. But I also knew something else, something that made my breath catch at the realization. I trusted him, even though Dominic Reyes was dangerous. Even though he belonged to the dark, I trusted him. And that was the most terrifying part of all. The afternoon in Boston was foggier than I remembered. The ocean wind cut across my face, carrying the sharp sting of salt, and the faint clatter of mooring lines striking the worn wooden posts along the pier. I stood alone, pulling my coat tighter around myself, the tracker phone Dominic had given me tucked into the innermost pocket. Even knowing he was watching every step from a distance, I felt the hollow ache of solitude spreading through me. Walking alone through this cold emptiness made the plan we had set feel frighteningly real, dangerously close, and painfully desperate. I moved toward the end of the pier where small boats bobbed in uncertain, uneven rhythms. The sky was shifting into a dull leaden gray, warning that the storm would arrive sooner than expected. I tried to keep my breathing steady, though my palms were damp. Dominic had said Requiem wouldn't miss their chance. And the most terrifying part was, he was right. When I turned to look back, the pier seemed even more deserted than usual. The few people who had been walking earlier had vanished into the thickening fog, and the seaside shops had closed earlier than they ever did. Everything was unnervingly quiet. I pulled out the phone, my finger hovering over the emergency button Dominic had told me to press only if necessary. But before I could act, my attention caught on something that froze my blood. A black car sat at the end of the road. Dark-tinted windows, no license plates, no movement inside. I turned and quickened my pace toward the exit, my heartbeat pounding against my ribs like a hammer striking wood. From the left side of the pier, a tall figure emerged. Another stepped out from the direction of the Potapana boat ramp. I realized the horrifying truth in an instant. They had been waiting here. I spun to run, but a large hand closed around my wrist, yanking me backward. I cried out on instinct, but the wind swallowed my voice, scattering it into the cold air. "Don't make this harder," a rough voice growled beside my ear, thick with the smell of cigarettes and stale alcohol. "You're coming with us." I struggled, blindly reaching for the emergency button, but two more men closed in. The one holding me tightened his grip with a force that felt like it might crack bone. Tears sprang to my eyes from the pain, but my mind clung desperately to one thought. Dominic was watching. I just had to hold on long enough. "Why me?" I shouted, though my throat felt strangled. "I don't know anything." One of the men let out a low, chilling laugh that echoed through the fog. "You know enough to die, and someone paid very well to get you." I barely had time to process the words before a sharp sound sliced through the air, like metal cutting wind. In the next heartbeat, everything erupted into chaos. The man gripping me suddenly released me, his body collapsing onto the wooden planks with a heavy thud, eyes frozen wide. Behind him stood Dominic, breathing hard, eyes dark as a storm front, the gun in his hand still trailing smoke. "Harper, down!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the crashing waves. I dropped instantly, instinct taking over, just as Dominic charged into the remaining men. Gunshots cracked through the empty pier, the sound ricocheting across the open water. Dominic moved so fast my eyes couldn't follow every step, every pivot, every shot fired with a precision that was terrifying in its efficiency. One man lunged at him from behind, but Dominic twisted, knocking the gun from his hand with a strike so forceful the metal clanged and skittered across the pier. Another attacker shoved Dominic hard against the railing, nearly sending him over into Bordeaux, the freezing water below. My heart seized. "Dominic!" He gritted his teeth, turned sharply, and used the momentum to slam the man to the ground with a punch so fierce the attacker didn't rise again. The last man drew a knife, but Dominic stepped in front of me, his presence as sharp and lethal as the blade itself. "Touch her again," he growled, his voice low and deadly, "and I'll wipe out your entire bloodline." The man stumbled back, but before he could run, Dominic swept his leg out and sent him crashing to the deck, unconscious. My breath caught when Dominic turned toward me, his eyes no longer cold but filled with a fear he tried and failed to hide. He dropped to one knee, his hands gripping my shoulders, his breath warm against my cheek in the icy air. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, unable to form words. Dominic pulled me into him, holding me tight against his chest as though letting go even an inch might mean losing me again. "I told you," he whispered, through labored breaths. "As long as I'm alive, they won't take you." I closed my eyes and leaned into him, feeling the rapid, hard rhythm of his heartbeat beneath his coat. And in that moment, a truth far more dangerous than anything tonight revealed itself. Dominic was afraid of losing me, even after he had insisted whatever was between us shouldn't exist. But there, in his arms, I realized any boundary we had built was shattered the moment he fired that first shot to save me. And this was only the beginning. Back at the Cape Cod estate after the ambush on the pier, I expected at least a sliver of safety to return. But it didn't. The warmth of the house felt strangled by the darkness that had followed us back from Boston. Dominic guided me inside, checking every window, every hallway, every shadow, as he had the first night we arrived, but this time, his movements were sharper, more urgent. When I sat on the sofa, my hands still trembling from adrenaline, Dominic turned toward me with eyes so intense I had to look away to steady my breathing. "Harper, you need to understand today was only the beginning. Requiem will come full force," he said, his voice low and cut like a warning blade. "They never stop once they choose a target." I nodded. I already knew. But what made it hard to breathe wasn't the enemies outside. It was something else growing quietly, dangerously, inside my chest. Fear not for myself, but for Dominic. When he nearly fell from the railing on the pier, my heart had twisted painfully inside me. I didn't want to ever feel that again. I didn't want to watch him vanish before my eyes like the 3 women before me. But right as I opened my mouth to say something, the phone in my pocket vibrated. The special phone Dominic had given me. I took it out, ready to silence the location function, thinking we were safe inside the estate. But my finger froze. The screen displayed a map of the area. A blue dot marked this. A right beside it, almost overlapping the same location. A red dot blinked steadily with a tiny label. "Backup device active." I squinted, a cold tremor running down my spine. I knew he was tracking the phone. I had agreed to be bait. But what was the red dot? It wasn't coming from the phone. A memory flashed in the penthouse. Before we left, Dominic had slipped something into the inner pocket of my coat. I had been too shaken to notice. My hand shook as I reached inside the coat, feeling through the lining until my fingers touched something small, hard, and cold. I pulled it out. A military-grade tracking chip, no larger than a button, blinking faintly. I stood abruptly, my heart tightening not from fear, but from the sting of betrayal. "Dominic," I called, my voice rasped and sharpened. He turned immediately, the alert in his expression shifting to worry when he saw what I held. "Harper." I lifted the chip in my trembling hand. "You planted a second tracker? You said the phone was enough. But you hid this on me?" Dominic didn't answer right away, and in that silence, something inside me dropped. "You thought I'd throw the phone away, didn't you?" I whispered. "You didn't trust I'd follow the plan? Or did you want to make sure that wherever I went, whatever I did, you kept control?" Dominic stepped closer, his face tightening, but his eyes full of a raw regret. "It was insurance, Harper. In case you dropped the phone, or they took it. I needed to know where you were so I could reach you." "But you didn't tell me," I shouted, my voice cracking through the room. "You gave me the phone like it was a compromise then. Behind my back you tagged me like some object. You took away my right to know." Dominic's hands clenched, his eyes darkening. "If I told you, you wouldn't have worn it." "Exactly," I cried. "Because I'm a person, Dominic. I'm your ally, not your possession." His body stiffened, as if my words had struck the most vulnerable part of him. "Harper," he said, his voice lower now, heavier, each breath loaded with something almost unbearable. "I've lost too many people because I couldn't find them fast enough. I would rather have you hate me for tracking you than fail to reach you before you disappear forever." "I don't belong to you, Dominic." "I know," he answered immediately, the words sounding as if he'd cut into himself just to say them. "But I won't apologize for wanting you alive." My eyes burned, feeling hot and bitter. "You don't understand. I trusted you. I held that phone and walked out onto that pier because I trusted you." I threw the tiny chip onto the table, the plastic hitting the wood with a dry, sharp sound. "But you used that trust to control me." Dominic didn't move, his entire body held in place by some invisible force. For the first time, I wasn't looking at Dominic Reyes, the most dangerous man in the city, but at a man losing the one thing he'd tried to protect in the most misguided way. I drew a deep breath and stepped back toward the door. "I need to go outside," I said softly, but firmly. Dominic moved toward me on instinct, but I backed away, my voice cutting through the air. "Don't." One single word, but enough to stop him as if he'd been shot. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something like real fear. Not fear of Requiem, not fear of enemies, but fear of losing me. I turned away and walked out, leaving Dominic standing in the wide living room, the firelight casting sharp, shifting shadows across his face, every line carved in steel, except for his eyes. They were broken. And in that moment I understood something painfully true. Dominic Reyes could fight an entire brutal organization, but there was nothing he could do to stop me from walking through that door. What we had built was as fragile as glass, and for the first time, it truly shattered. The door of the Cape Cod villa closed behind me with a heavy thud so cold it felt like a blade sliding down my spine. I hurried down the steps, my breath tight with anger, hurt, and a choking ache I refused to name. The sea wind slapped straight into my face, salty and biting, stinging like open-handed blows. I just wanted to get away from this place, from Dominic, from the plea and pain in his eyes I had never seen before. I followed the narrow path through the pines, the leaves scraping against each other with sharp, metallic sounds. Dusk had settled, and dark clouds massed at the horizon, warning of a storm. I knew I shouldn't be alone, not after everything that had happened. But the truth was, I couldn't breathe in that house under Dominic's gaze, under the weight of knowing he'd been watching me, and that I had let him touch places in my heart I'd never given anyone. A car passed along the forest road ahead, its headlights cutting 2 long beams of white across the trees. I stopped and wiped the tears I hadn't realized were falling. Maybe it was a neighbor, maybe just someone passing through. I stepped deeper into the dirt road leading to the main route, planning to call a taxi back to Boston. I reached for my phone, but something hit me like a cold shock. No signal, no service. The screen showed nothing but those 2 bleak words, no signal. I turned back toward the villa, a few hundred meters away, warm light still glowing in the living room right where Dominic still stood, or so I imagined, watching through the darkness. A part of me wanted to go back, but my pride held me still. I took a breath and kept walking, and that was when the black car returned. This time, it moved slowly, very slowly. My heart tightened. The headlights pinned me in place like a trapped animal. I stepped back, but before I could turn, the car door flew open. 3 men stepped out, dark coats, hoods shadowing their faces, and I recognized them instantly. Their eyes, their posture, their strides, requiem. I turned to run on instinct, but the damp ground slid under my feet. A hand clamped around my arm, yanking so hard I felt my bones scream. "Let go!" I shouted, my voice cracking with panic, but my scream disappeared into the forest wind. Another man slammed a cloth over my mouth, the chemical sting burning straight up my skull. I kicked, twisted, bit down hard on a hand, but my strength was nothing against 3 massive bodies. "Hurry," one growled. "Reyes will notice soon. Dominic." The way he said his name felt like a truth I couldn't reach in time. My arms were wrenched behind my back, a rope cinched so tight around my wrists that blood stilled under my skin. They dragged me into the car, my feet kicking helplessly, until a punch drove into my stomach, folding me in half, knocking the breath from my lungs. The door slammed shut. The cloth slipped off my face, but a hand covered my mouth immediately. "Quiet." A voice snapped, low and lethal. The car shot forward, tires grinding over sand and dirt. Through the crack of the window, I caught the last flicker of light from the villa between the trees. Dominic. I wanted to believe he knew I was in danger. I wanted to believe he would come. But the car accelerated, and that warm light vanished into the black forest. The sharp turn threw me sideways. A man grabbed my hair, his voice blending with the engine's roar. "You think you can run?" I clenched my teeth, gasping. "Why, me?" "Because you're on our list," he snarled, laughter twisting into something rotten. "And because Reyes cares about you?" My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echoing in my skull. Dominic cared, and that was exactly why I was in their hands. The farther we drove, the colder it became, the darker the road turned. My hands trembled, not only from fear but from a bitter realization. I had walked away at the very moment I needed Dominic most. I left, him minutes before Requiem caught me. If I had stayed, if I hadn't pushed him away, no. Thinking like that only made the terror spread, but when the car finally stopped, I knew any "if" was too late. The door opened, a blast of cold wind hitting my skin. A crumbling building loomed in the dark like a giant shadow swallowing the sky. They dragged me out, my legs barely holding me, And before a hood was pulled tight over my head, plunging the world into black, I had one final thought. Dominic, please get here in time, just in time. The moment the villa door closed behind Harper, Dominic stood frozen in the living room, his hand gripping the table edge so hard his knuckles turned white. He had survived countless confrontations, seen humanity at its cruelest, yet never had he felt so powerless as when Harper stepped back from him with eyes full of hurt. He forced himself to breathe, to believe that giving her a moment outside would calm her. But the instinct in his bones screamed the opposite. Dominic walked to the window, staring into the damp darkness as the sea wind howled. She hadn't gone far. He knew that. Harper had no car, no cell signal, no familiarity with the terrain, but he knew something else even more clearly. Requiem hunted the smallest cracks. And right now Harper was that crack. Dominic pulled out his phone and opened the private tracking map he'd kept hidden all this time. A blinking green dot appeared near the eastern woods. Dominic exhaled. She was close. But in the next second, the signal jerked sharply, shooting in the opposite direction, moving too fast to be footsteps. A straight path, speed doubling, tripling, quadrupling. Dominic's body went still for one brutal second. Then he cursed, the sound sharp as a blade. "No! Harper!" He bolted out of the house, slamming his hand onto the garage panel so hard it rattled. His black car roared to life as he hit the gas. The vehicle tore through the darkness, headlights slicing through fog, tires spitting dirt behind him. He drove with a fury he never allowed himself in any battle. The forest trembled with each dip of the wheels. On the map, the green dot dragged south, toward the old route where 2 past kidnappings had occurred. Dominic understood instantly. They had Harper. And they were taking her to the place he feared most, a Requiem holding site. His hands shook as he adjusted the map. For the first time in years, Dominic Reyes trembled. But then the shaking stopped, replaced by a cold, metallic resolve sharpening in his eyes. If Requiem believed taking Harper would weaken him, they had made the greatest mistake of their lives. Dominic activated the encrypted communicator, connecting to the only 2 men he trusted. "Marco, I need coordinates. Requiem is moving south. Analyze now." The clatter of keys filled the line. "Got it. An abandoned warehouse near the Rhode Island border. Dominic, that's their nest." Dominic clenched his jaw. "I know." Marco's voice dropped. "What are you planning to do?" Dominic's reply was so certain Marco fell silent. "I'm getting her back, even if I have to kill every last one of them." 3 quiet seconds passed. Then Marco said, "I'll mobilize your men." "No," Dominic cut in. "The fewer the better. They'll kill Harper if they see me coming with soldiers." Dominic ended the call, gripping the wheel until the leather buckled under his fingers. The headlights hit the dirt road that led to the highway, the same route Harper had been taken. When he saw the tire tracks pressed deep into the wet ground, something inside him tightened in a way he'd never experienced. Not anger, but a deeper fear. Losing Harper. He stepped out of the car, crouched down, and traced the groove in the earth with his fingertips. His breath came fast, heavy, laced with guilt. "I shouldn't have let you leave," he whispered to himself. "I shouldn't have let you hurt, because of me." He rose, eyes fixed on the shadowed path where she had been dragged away. The sea wind slammed against his back, but Dominic didn't feel the cold. He felt only one thing. Nothing in this world mattered more than bringing Harper home. He got back into the car, restarted the engine, and closed his eyes for a brief second, pulling every ounce of fury, fear, and heartbreak inward, forging it into a single blade. When he opened them, they were no longer the eyes of a man. They were the eyes of the assassin Requiem once feared most. Dominic hit the gas, the engine roaring like thunder as he tore through the night. "Wait for me, Harper," he said, his voice both a vow and a death sentence for anyone who touched her. "I'm coming." And this time Dominic Reyes wasn't going after Requiem as an enemy to eliminate. He was going after them for one person only. The woman he never meant to love, but couldn't stop loving. Harper Lane. The night wind whipped across Dominic's face as he stepped out of the car, the darkness of the Rhode Island outskirts swallowing everything except the faint yellow glow of the abandoned warehouse ahead. The wide yard was unnaturally quiet. No cars, no footprints, no sound except for the soft rattle of loose metal in the breeze. Dominic moved slowly, his back slightly lowered, his eyes wide to catch even the smallest shift in the shadows. Somewhere inside that warehouse, Harper was alive, and every second that passed tightened the fury gripping his chest. He approached the door, his footsteps so light they left no echo. Pressing his hand against the cold metal, he tilted his head and listened. Inside, men's voices echoed, distant but clear. He immediately recognized the voice of Requiem's deputy commander, the one who escaped during the purge 2 years ago. The cold muzzle of Dominic's handgun rested along his palm as he nudged the side door open just enough to create a narrow slit. What he saw made his stomach drop. Harper was tied to a steel chair in the center of the room, her hair tangled, her lips bruised, but her eyes still sharp, still awake, still fighting. 2 men stood beside her, and one was stepping toward her. Dominic didn't breathe, didn't think, didn't feel. His body reacted with the instinct of a man shaped by blood, steel, and darkness. He stepped inside, 1 step, then another, then a third. A gunshot burst from the left corner before the guard even understood what was happening. Dominic had already thrown his short blade knife in a clean arc, the handle driving straight into the guard's throat, dropping him silently. The remaining 3 spun around, panic jolting through their movements as they reached for their weapons. Dominic had already slipped into the darkness near the wall, lunging forward faster than the flickering warehouse lights could follow. The first bullet grazed his shoulder, but Dominic twisted low, sliding across the floor as his gun flew into position with fluid precision. 1 shot shattered the second man's knee, his scream breaking the stale air. The third cursed and fired wildly into the shadows, but Dominic was already behind him, wrenching the man's wrist until the gun clattered to the floor, then driving an elbow into his temple with a dry, brutal crack. The man dropped instantly. Only the deputy commander remained. He retreated toward Harper, dragging her against his chest and lifting a knife to her throat. Dominic stopped just a few steps away. Harper lifted her head, her eyes finding Dominic's in a split-second connection. No words passed between them, but he understood. She wasn't afraid. She trusted him. "Stop!" the deputy commander shouted, pressing the blade harder, its cold edge glinting under the light. Dominic raised his hands, his voice low and so cold the concrete floor might have frozen. "Let her go!" The man scoffed. "So you can shoot me? I'm not stupid." Dominic tilted his head, his gaze never leaving Harper. "You're right. You're not stupid, but you are desperate." The man's face twitched. Dominic knew he'd hit the mark. 1 heartbeat of distraction. That was all Dominic needed. A single bullet left the barrel at the exact moment Dominic shifted to the right to avoid the reflex shot. The round tore through the lower part of the man's wrist, forcing him to drop the knife, and Harper jerked sideways out of his grip just as Dominic surged forward. His fist struck the man's jaw so hard that the body lifted before crashing back into the wall. He was unconscious instantly. Dominic dropped to his knees beside Harper, his hands trembling as he untied her, his eyes scanning her for any sign of serious injury. She was breathing, conscious, but her voice was hoarse with fear and exhaustion. "You really came." Dominic bowed his head, his forehead nearly touching hers, his breath rough but his words breaking. "If the world fell apart, Harper, I'd still come for you." Her lips pressed together, her eyes red but dry. Dominic lifted her, wrapping her arm over his shoulder. Harper's body was ice cold, but her pulse was there, and that alone allowed Dominic to breathe. As he carried her out of the warehouse, beams of light swept in from Marco's team, silhouettes rushing forward with weapons ready. Dominic spoke 1 sentence that silenced them all. "Clear everything. Let no one walk out." He didn't look back. He didn't care about the footsteps, the gunshots, or the screams beginning to erupt inside. Dominic held Harper against his chest, carrying her away from that hell, as if letting go even for 1 second would make her disappear again, and Dominic Reyes swore that would never happen again. As Dominic carried Harper out of the warehouse, her body trembling from cold and shock, her mind remained fully awake. Flashlights from Marco's team swept over the rafters, and gunfire echoed deep inside the Niffer, building like hammers striking steel. Dominic held her so tightly that Harper could feel the furious rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek, part reassurance, part silent plea that she stay with him. But in that moment, Harper's eyes widened, because behind Dominic, in the darkness of a steel corridor, she saw something he couldn't. Another figure, a gun aimed straight at the back of Dominic's head. Harper didn't think, analyze, or hesitate. Instinct surged through her raw, fierce, primal. She grabbed Dominic's collar and yanked him down just as the gunshot ripped through the air. The bullet slammed into the steel beam above where Dominic's skull had been, ringing with a sharp metallic crack. Dominic spun immediately, shielding her, pressing Harper against the wall with his arm like a steel barrier. But Harper was no longer a passive victim waiting to be saved. For the first time, her fear of losing Dominic turned her into someone ready to fight back. When the remaining attacker lunged from the shadows, Harper shoved Dominic aside and grabbed a fallen metal rod, its point jagged and razor-sharp. The man barely lifted his head before she swung, driving the rod straight into his arm. He screamed, the gun crashing to the floor, and Dominic finished him with a swift, deadly strike. Dominic grabbed Harper, his eyes wild with a terror he had never shown. "What were you doing?" he rasped, voice cracking with fear. Harper panted, pale but fierce. "Saving you." Dominic's grip tightened around her arm, his breath shaking, trembling in a way he tried to hide but couldn't. He pulled her against him again, as if afraid she'd vanish the moment he let go. But the moment shattered instantly. A clicking sound echoed from above the metallic rack of a rifle being cocked. Dominic shoved Harper to the floor, covering her with his body as a storm of bullets rained down from the mezzanine. Sparks flew as rounds clanged against metal, steel dust filling the mezzanine air. Harper lay beneath him, feeling the weight and desperate protection in every breath he took, and she saw with frightening clarity that Dominic was becoming a living shield. She couldn't let that happen. When Dominic pulled her up to run toward the side exit, Harper suddenly slipped from his grasp, rolling into the shadows behind a toppled stack of crates. "Harper!" Dominic roared, but she had already vanished. She crawled low, steadying her breath to stay silent. During her capture, she had memorized the staircase leading to the mezzanine and the blind spot of the shooter. This was her only chance to help him from behind. She crept toward the stairs, gripping the metal rod tighter. Each step cut into her feet like blades, but she didn't stop. The shooter was still firing at Dominic, trying to corner him. Harper held her breath, pressed against the wall, her eyes locked on her target. Then, as he shifted position to dodge Dominic's counterfire, Harper moved. She surged, up, swinging the rod and smashing it against his wrist. The gun fell, sliding off the edge and clattering onto the floor near Dominic. The soldier spun toward her, shocked and furious, reaching for her, but she stepped back just in time. He lunged. Harper slipped, nearly falling off the high mezzanine. Her hand clutched the rotted wooden railing, the wood cracking under her weight. The man grabbed her collar, but before he could pull her up, a dark blur shot up the stairs like lightning. Dominic. He seized the soldier by the throat, threw him aside, and delivered a blow that sent the man crashing off the mezzanine, his body hitting the concrete with a sickening thud. Dominic turned to Harper, his face drained of color, his eyes filled with a depth of fear she had never witnessed. "Don't ever do that again," he said, his voice low and shaking as if he had just lost his soul and gotten it back in the same breath. Harper gasped for air, but she answered with quiet determination, "If I didn't, you'd be the one dead." Dominic pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly it felt as if he wanted to fuse the two of them into one, his breath scorching against her hair. And for the first time, Harper understood a brutal, beautiful truth. She was not just someone he wanted to protect. She was someone who could change his fate. And as they stood there amid the scent of gunpowder and the echoes of near death, Harper realized they had crossed a line one neither of them could ever go back from. The gray sky hung low over the scorched warehouse grounds, the air thick with the lingering scent of gunpowder as Harper and Dominic stepped outside, the early morning chill settling on their skin like a cruel reminder that the night's battle was far from over. Marco's team spread out across the area, flashlights sweeping through every corner, radios crackling nonstop. Dominic kept Harper close, his hand pressed against her back as though releasing her even for a single second would cause the entire world to collapse. Harper had barely steadied her breath when a voice shouted urgently behind them, strained and tight. "Dom, you need to see this." Dominic spun around. Marco ran toward them, eyes wide, pointing at a hatch behind the warehouse they had missed earlier in the chaos. Dominic gripped Harper's hand and led her down the steps, and the first thing Harper noticed as they descended into the damp, cold stairwell was the musty smell mixed with metal, as if the place had been sealed for months. The steel door groaned open, revealing a wide, pitch-dark room lit only by the shaky beam of flashlights. Harper stopped breathing. 3 women sat slumped against the wall, their hands tied but very much alive. Their eyes were wide, terrified, vacant like small birds caged for far too long. Harper recognized them instantly, even though their hair was matted, their faces gaunt, their skin pale from lack of light. Rebecca Walsh, Mia Torres, Allison Chen, names that had haunted Boston for half a year. Harper rushed forward before Dominic could even move. Rebecca, oh God. Rebecca looked at her, lips trembling, eyes glassy. You're the journalist. Her voice was as fragile as a strand of thread about to snap. Harper nodded quickly, kneeling to untie her. You're safe now. The FBI is on their way. We're getting you out of here. Dominic stood behind her, his eyes still cold and alert. But the corners of his gaze flickered, because for the first time since the string of disappearances began, survivors had been found. Marco immediately called for medics. Rescue teams rushed in, wrapping thermal blankets around the 3 women. Harper rose to her feet, her hands shaking from adrenaline, from relief, and from the painful truth. They weren't taken as leverage against Dominic or to be sold. They were being stored like merchandise, held until transport. They survived only because Dominic arrived in time. Others might not have. As Harper helped Rebecca stand, sirens wailed outside, loud and sharp like a blade cutting through the morning air. Dominic turned instantly, eyes narrowing. Damn it, the FBI is too fast. Marco reached him, panting. I didn't call them. Someone else did. Dominic looked at Harper right as she turned toward him. Both understood at the same time. One of the 3 survivors must have used a hidden phone taken from a guard to call for help the moment her hands were freed. No one blamed them, but it meant Dominic had no time left to escape cleanly. The FBI did not see a savior. They saw Dominic Reyes, leader of one of Boston's most dangerous underground factions, and Dominic knew it. Harper, he said quietly, his voice steady but lower than usual. Harper stepped closer, her breathing uneven. You have to go. No. Dominic cupped her cheek. If they see me here, they'll cuff me on the spot, and you'll be dragged into something far worse than Requiem. Harper wanted to argue, but the sirens grew louder, blue and red strobes flashing through the shattered warehouse windows. Dominic leaned in, his voice soft enough to hurt. You saved them. You saved me. Now let me keep you out of this. Harper grabbed the collar of his shirt. You can't just disappear every time things get hard. Dominic looked at her, his dark eyes trembling for a fleeting second as if he wanted to stay, wanted to stand beside her, wanted to risk handcuffs and federal agents just to remain, but he couldn't. Not while Requiem still breathed. Not while Harper was still a target. I promise, Dominic whispered, his fingers brushing hers like a vow. I'll come back. Then Marco pulled him toward the secondary tunnel behind the warehouse, one only known to men who had used this place for clandestine deals. Harper stood in the darkness, hearing the thrum of helicopters slicing the air, the shouts of FBI agents, the crash of metal doors being forced open. When a blinding white flashlight hit her face, Harper didn't move, her fists still clenched as if holding onto his warmth, to his promise, inside her palm. And she knew with painful certainty, the police could end an investigation. But the war between Dominic and the darkness behind Requiem had only just begun. Harper was escorted out of the warehouse grounds under heavy FBI protection, green and red lights flaring across the bleak early morning sky. She stood among investigators, questions fired at her from every direction, flashlights glaring, radios buzzing, but her mind wasn't there. It remained stuck in the tunnel where Dominic had disappeared moments before the FBI stormed in. Even as sirens blared and orders were shouted like thunder, Harper heard only one echo in her mind. I promise I'll come back. That sentence clung to her heart like a lifeline amid the chaos. When the 3 survivors were loaded into ambulances, red lights washing over Harper's face, she felt as though she were drifting through a dream, half awake, half numb. The kidnappers were caught. The victims survived. The case she had chased for 6 long months was finally cracked open. But the one person she needed to see was the one who couldn't return. A female agent approached, resting a gentle hand on Harper's shoulder. Miss Lane, we know you've been through a traumatic ordeal, but we need to bring you to headquarters for a full statement. Harper nodded, but her eyes remained on the southern tree line, where Dominic had vanished. She climbed into the FBI vehicle, hollow and aching, as if a piece of her had been torn away. During her statement, Harper answered every question with careful precision. She spoke about Requiem, about the kidnappings, about what she saw inside the warehouse, but she said nothing, absolutely nothing about Dominic, not about him saving her, not about his ties to the underground, not about anything that could turn him into the next target. When asked to describe the man who stormed in and rescued the victims, Harper simply said, "I didn't get a clear look. I was dizzy and threatened. Everything happened too fast." She saw suspicion flicker in their eyes, but also respect for a woman who had survived and helped dismantle a trafficking ring. Harper signed the report, her hand still trembling. When she left the FBI headquarters that evening, the cold Boston wind cut through her coat and made her shiver. The streets were bright, cars moving, people living their lives as if the world had not tilted off balance, but Harper felt suspended between two realities, one belonging to the law, the other to Dominic Reyes, and both were demanding she choose. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, her phone vibrated faintly, a message from an unlisted number. Harper opened it, her heart tightening instantly. "Are you safe?" Dominic. No punctuation, no name, but she knew. She recognized the restraint in the words, the worry he tried to hide, and the distance forcing them into silence. She typed back, "I'm safe, but are you?" The message sent, but no reply came. 5 minutes, 10, 20. Then her phone lit up. "I can't show myself. The FBI is watching the area. I need to disappear for a while." Harper bit her lip until she tasted the faint metallic tang of blood. She typed slowly, carefully, as if pulling each word from the aching tension in her chest. "How long?" A long pause. Then the screen glowed. "Until it's safe." Harper let out a soft, broken laugh, bitter as tears. "You always say that," she typed, her fingers trembling. "But I never know what safe means." Dominic's final message felt like a touch to the most fragile part of her heart. "I know, but I want you to live, not hide." Harper stood in the crowded street, the glow of yellow lights, catching the tear that slipped down her cheek, making it shine like shattered glass. She wanted to scream that she didn't want him to hide. She wanted to say she wanted him here, even for 1 minute. She wanted to tell him that losing him was more terrifying than any investigation or criminal network. But her chest tightened, and she couldn't bring herself to write any of it. Instead, she typed one sentence, not knowing whether she was sending it to him or whispering it to herself. Then, "I'll wait." The message showed, delivered, but no reply followed. Harper stood there for a long time, until hours later, when she finally made her way back to her small South End apartment, her heart still aching but her hand warm with the only thing left between them. The fragile promise of a reunion with no return date. Dominic vanished from Boston like a wind sliced in half, leaving no trace behind, nothing for police or enemies to follow. But his disappearance was not an escape. It was the beginning of a silent, ruthless, and precise cleansing. A few days after the raid, Dominic stood in a dim room on the top floor of an old warehouse in East Cambridge, a place that had once been the nerve center of his organization. The muted light cast shadows across his face, carving the already sharp lines even deeper. In front of him, a wall-sized screen displayed rows of data, names of every person in the system, every transaction, every route, every exchange, each one reviewed by him. Some had betrayed him. Some had conspired with Requiem. Some had stayed silent far too long. Dominic knew that if he wanted to keep Harper safe, if he wanted to ensure his world would never touch hers again, then this darkness had to be burned clean. Marco entered, the usual hint of mockery gone from his face, replaced by tension. "You really want to do this?" Dominic did not look up. "Requiem isn't just a group. It's a branch rooted deep inside the old organization. I let it grow too long. But cutting it all out. Dominic, that's the same as tearing down the great empire you spent 10 years building." Dominic's lips curved, a smile without joy. "If it was built on innocent blood, then it deserves to fall." Marco was silent for a moment before exhaling. "All for her?" Dominic's eyes never left the screen, but the words slipped from his lips soft as breath. "In part. And the other part? Because I saw myself in the way Requiem acted, and I don't want to become that man again." A cold gust drifted through the cracked window, making the papers tremble. Marco watched him for a long moment, then nodded. Then we start. In the weeks that followed, Dominic met with every leader of every smaller branch, removing those who had partnered with Requiem, cutting off every human trafficking route, wiping out underground warehouses, burning documents, even dismantling long-standing units if they touched any form of exploitation or trade in human lives. He shed no blood unless necessary. But he also allowed no resistance. Those who fought were stripped of power. Some vanished from Boston. Some attempted to resist in futility and were swiftly subdued. Dominic did not kill them if they had not committed crimes. He simply removed their power, cleanly, decisively, in the way of a man trying to walk out of darkness, yet still forged by the darkness he once commanded. The organization began to change from its roots. Transport routes once used for illicit cargo became channels for legitimate supply chains serving local businesses. Underground warehouses in Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Maine were re-registered under Reyes Maritime Logistics, a fully legal shipping company. Funds once used for shadowy transactions were redirected into support programs for trafficking survivors and community recovery initiatives. Marco was the first to be stunned. "You're turning yourself into a businessman?" Dominic didn't answer. He only looked toward the window, where the Boston harbor reflected the fading light of late afternoon. In that glow, strong winds rushed across the water as if scrubbing away old scars. Dominic stood with one hand braced on the railing, his dark eyes no longer cold but weighted with restraint, carrying a slow but irrevocable determination. "If I want to be with Harper," he said, each word shaped like stone, "I can't let my world hurt innocent people. Not one more." Marco crossed his arms. "Does she know what you're doing?" Dominic remained silent. "Not yet." "Are you not going to tell her?" Dominic closed his eyes for a moment. The wind brushed his coat, and the faint scent of sea salt passed over him like a hand touching the softest place he never admitted he had. "I want to see her, when I can stand in the light without dragging darkness behind me." Marco looked at him with a mix of respect and something like pity. "You're changing your entire life for one woman." Dominic opened his eyes, clear and sharp as water catching sunlight. "No, I'm changing because for the first time in my life, I want to live like a human being." That night, Dominic stood alone before the window, looking down at Boston from high above. The city pulsed with movement, glowing, alive. Part of him belonged to this place. But another part reached toward somewhere else, a small apartment in South End, where a woman lived without knowing that, because of her, an entire world of darkness had begun to shift. He placed his palm against the cool glass. "Wait a little longer, Harper," he whispered. "I'm walking toward you." And this time, he walked on his own terms, not to hide in the shadows, but to become a man who could stand beside her in the light. The last cold winds of the season swept across Boston, as if carrying away the final remnants of storm-worn days. Harper stood on the Longfellow Bridge, holding a steaming cup of coffee, watching the Charles River ripple into small circles under the fading evening light. The city buzzed as always, but her inner world had changed, quieter, deeper, more grown after everything she had survived. It had been 3 months since the night she escaped the warehouse in Rhode Island. 3 months since Dominic disappeared to cleanse the darkness behind him. Every evening, Harper stepped onto her small balcony, staring down at the city lights, wondering where he was, whether he was safe, whether he still thought of her the way she still thought of him. Then on an early summer morning, while checking work emails, she found a plain white envelope at her door with no postmark. Inside was an old photograph of Boston Harbor at sunrise and a single line written in a familiar hand. "The waves are calm now. I hope you are too." No signature, but she knew. Her heart struck a single deep, trembling beat, as if the moment had awakened everything she had tried to keep still inside herself. She stepped out of her apartment with the photo still in hand, and for reasons she couldn't explain, her feet took her back to the Longfellow Bridge, where she and Dominic had last spoken about whether people could truly change. A soft breeze brushed through her hair, carrying with it a strange hint of hope. Dominic hadn't said he was coming back now, but that line told her he was still out there somewhere, trying to walk toward the light, keeping his promise to her in the way he knew how. Elsewhere, in his new office at Reyes Maritime Logistics in the Seaport District, Dominic stood by the window with one hand on the steel railing, staring out at the vast ocean. His suit now was that of a businessman, not the leader of an underworld empire. His old organization was nearly a thing of the past. The networks of trafficking, laundering, intimidation had been erased. In their place stood legitimate shipping contracts, legal warehouses, and employees earning honest wages. And Dominic knew. All of it began with the woman who made him want to step out of the darkness, not by force, but by making him look at himself. Marco entered, placing a stack of documents on the table. The community project in South End is finished. Shall we move the Trafficking Survivor Fund into Phase 2? Dominic nodded. Do it. Marco watched him for a long moment before smiling. You really have changed. Dominic didn't deny it. He only looked toward the horizon. I have one more thing to do. That same afternoon, Harper lingered on the bridge before turning toward home. But as she passed the small garden at the end of the bridge, a low, deep, familiar voice sounded behind her. You still like standing here? Harper froze instantly, not out of shock, but because her heart dropped and rose all at once. She turned. Dominic stood a few steps away, hands in the pockets of a long black coat, the evening light softening his features in a way she had never seen. Gone was the coldness of a man from the shadows. Gone was the tension of someone always ready to fight. Here stood a man looking at her with eyes deep, honest, and gentle enough to tighten her throat. You said the waves had calmed, Harper said softly, her eyes glistening. You think it's time? Dominic took a step closer, then stopped just in front of her. I think, if you still want me back. Harper looked at him, at the changes in his eyes, his breath, the way he stood before her as someone who had chosen to become better. And she knew she had changed too. No longer the trembling woman in a dark warehouse, no longer the journalist who threw herself into danger chasing answers. She had become someone who understood that light did not always come from perfect places. Sometimes it came from a man who once lived in darkness but chose to walk out of it for you. Harper smiled, soft but powerful as an acceptance. Let's start again. Dominic exhaled, releasing the fear he had held for far too long. He extended his hand, not demanding, not insisting, simply offering. Harper placed her hand in his. His palm was warm, steady, and for the first time in a long time, she felt true peace. A beginning not perfect, not guaranteed, but a beginning after the storm. And sometimes, that is the most grown kind of love. Thank you to everyone who stayed with this story until the very last moment. This is not just a tale of crime, darkness, or escape, but a journey of two people finding themselves after everything fell apart. I hope that each of you listening will see that we all have the strength to step out of the storms in our lives if we have the courage to face the darkness and choose the light. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe, like, and share so we can continue bringing meaningful and emotional content every day. What did you feel from this story? Did anything echo your own life? Please leave a comment so we can hear the honest emotions from your heart. Thank you, and see you in the next video. Wishing all of you good health, peace, and joy in every day you live. Goodbye, and until next time.